All right, let's get into our interview here. Joining us on the Miami Marlins Hot Stove Show tonight is new Miami Marlins pitching coach, Daniel Moskos. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us, man. We chatted, full disclosure, we chatted with you for a second before we did this. Happy New Year. You say you've only got till January 15th, so we're one day away, but Happy New Year, Daniel. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. You snuck it in just in time. Happy New Year to y'all as well. Really excited to be here and getting to chat with y'all.
All right, well, let's start right there. You're excited to be here. I did not anticipate you would say otherwise, but you have an amazing trajectory to get to where you are now. Steven and I will dive into all of that, but just real big picture, your trajectory over the course of your career, playing to now coaching. What excites you about this opportunity, and how did this all come to fruition to be the Miami Marlins pitching coach?
Oh, wow. Loaded question there. It's actually pretty interesting. So obviously the Marlins did a bunch of hiring this offseason. I don't think that's a secret to anybody at this point. I was actually included in their director of pitching search the first go round. They wanted to get directors hired before they moved down to like staff, et cetera. And so I was included in that process, went through the week-long deal, and at the end of it, as it shook out, I didn't get the offer. And basically the feedback that I got is basically the industry and the Marlins specifically saw me more as a coach than a director. And that was fine. I kind of knew that going in, and that it was going to be an uphill climb to get to the director position, having only really been a coach in professional baseball. But it was something that's intrigued me, something that I felt like my skill set at least lined up enough. And I wanted to shoot my shot and just see where the cards fell with that one. And so after I didn't get that, they did say that they would be back in touch. I didn't know exactly what that meant. I do now, obviously. But what they ended up finding out through the interview process of, courting me as a director is that, hey, we might have an opportunity, or might have an option here as the major league pitching coach down the road once we get the director position hired. And fortunately enough, Bill Hazel was the hire for the director position. I've had a working relationship with him for a number of years, know him quite well. And it just ended up that they circled back to me for the major league pitching coach position.
When did you and Bill work together?
So it's funny, I actually, Bill was kind of my throwing instructor. I went up to train at Driveline in the off season of 2018. And he's the one who took me through my assessment, took me through all of like my player plan, the throwing program, and all of that stuff. And so I actually met him as a disciple that was just looking for him to make me a better pitcher. And so I spent 4 months at Driveline training. I threw in the pro day there. And, as I knew I was at the end of my playing career, and I was just waiting to see if, I was able to make something happen on the playing front. They ended up approaching me about asking me if I would be interested in working there. And the reason they did that is they saw me interact with all of the players in the training room, or in the training facility, and saw that, I was pretty good for culture. Guys kind of gravitated towards me. And I had good personality, but they also knew that like all of the things that they were starting to enforce and use and leverage into their player development, like was something that was completely new to me, but something that I obviously like became very enthralled with, really dove into it, started really working as a coach as I was learning myself. I only had one training subject. It was me, but what better way to kind of learn the ins and outs of this new age of technology than to apply it to yourself, who better than really anybody else does. And so I started to geek out for technology, pitch movement, pitch data, biomechanics, workload monitoring, research studies, like all of these things that I just never really had exposure to really started to intrigue me. I dove right in. And so once they asked me, I talked to my wife. I was like, look, I have a job to go play in Mexico again. It's not something I really want to do. I had a 2-year-old daughter at that point. And so getting closer to home made some sense. And the thought of getting to eat dinner every night with my family, which is something that I know sounds crazy, but like not something that all baseball players or baseball coaches get to do. It sounded like a treat. And so when I approached her about it, she was on board, excited for the opportunity, especially as like it's a seamless transition out of the playing career and into the life after your playing career. which is something that, like, as I was an older individual, some of my friends had started to move out of the baseball world and really struggled in that transition to their next stage in life. And so to be presented with an opportunity for it to come really, really quickly and organically and easy, I jumped at the opportunity, and I think I started work the Monday after Super Bowl Sunday, and I've never looked back since.
There's so much there, Daniel. I mean, we definitely want to get into your playing career, but even there, you just dissecting Driveline.
You have a couple days for us, Daniel. Can we do this split session, Stephen?
How are you supposed to bounce off a question off of that? All right, let's start, because then I'm like, you went from interviewing for the director of pitching to then like going to the pitching coach, which still is a pretty darn good gig. Let's start though with Chicago. Like, what did you learn, I guess, in Chicago bringing to Miami?
Well, for starters, it's, first step at the major league level as a coach on the coaching side. And so, learning how to interact with the new age of personalities, the game has gone younger. And so you almost have to stay younger as a coach to be able to relate to some of these guys. So I did learn a lot about that. How do you navigate egos? How do you navigate the different dynamics of a clubhouse and a pitching staff? And I think that's integrally important because it's something that really shapes the way that I like to do things, which is building relationships with guys. The new era of baseball where we do push development and we push things and almost take guys out of their comfort zone. Like, we're going to ask them to do some things, and we're going to ask them to be vulnerable. And if we're going to do that, like, I need them to know that I have their back, that I know where they're coming from, that I've walked in their shoes. And so I think that that's really, really valuable. The second piece would be just, learning what an overall, like, overarching philosophy for an organization is. Like, what do you believe in? What do you want to stand on? What do you want to be known for? And while I didn't get to drive a lot of that because, I was just the assistant there, I did have a voice. So I did have the ear of the pitching coach. And so I did help at least like maneuver and deliver some of those things, but it was also just very cool to be able to sit back and observe. I do feel like I got to learn from a great pitching coach. Tommy Hotovy is very, very good. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now if I didn't spend the past 3 years with him. And like, I truly believe that, right? Like, yes, like, talent matters, opportunity matters, but I wouldn't be the pitching coach that I am now without having learned underneath him and had him guide some of my development and growth. I think that's really like a good place to start, and hopefully it's less thorough and allows more room for questions for you guys.
Let me then go here. It's interesting, Stephen. Daniel, and hearing you talk for 5 minutes, I feel a lot of what we've heard from members of this coaching staff already: relationship building, getting to know these guys, developing trust. It's very difficult to do, especially when you're coming into an organization for the first time. Where do you begin with that, Daniel? And what have you been doing to make sure that you get to a place where you feel comfortable come March 27th on opening day, that the 5 men that start the season in the rotation that probably won't finish it, and you'll work with 10 different starting pitchers and the relievers, but they trust you and you know them on a deeper level to help connect with them?
Well, the first order of business was getting in touch with everyone. The onboarding process has become a little bit long and more thorough. And so unfortunately, baseball moves faster than the baseball media world moves faster than the baseball organizations do. And so, of course, the news broke before it had even been formally announced by the organization. And so we knew we were up against a time crunch and a time clock there. And so I got all the players' contact lists. We set up our first wave of phone calls. And each phone call was roughly, I would say the shortest one was probably 25 minutes. The longest one was 45 minutes to an hour. And really, it's just like what you said, just pouring into them, asking them questions, not just about baseball, but, what's their home life like? Do they like to travel? Do they like to play video games? Are they more introvert, extrovert? They have wives and kids and families. What do they like to do with their free time? And so, like, most of the conversation started with like 15 minutes plus of background information of truly like agnostic of baseball at all, just getting to know them. Obviously we ended up diving into more baseball specific things as, the calls went on. You want to know what their training is like, how many days a week are they throwing, lifting, where's their body weight at, anything that they've been focused on, the specifics. But really, like, I wanted it to be a more informal get to know you type of phone call. And I do think that we really, really accomplished that. And the conversations have rolled pretty seamlessly and pretty well since that point. There's been, various check-ins via text message, follow-up phone calls, and whatnot. But really, it's like setting the foundation for what the working relationship's going to look like. They know that they can call me and ask me about anything. It doesn't just have to be baseball. If they're, need advice on something, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but like, I like it to be an open door that doesn't just have to be baseball, because we're around these guys for goodness, 8 months out of the year. Hopefully 9+ if, we are fortunate enough to make playoffs here in the near future. But like, the day-to-day grind is real. And so building a relationship that transcends just baseball, I think really, really matters.
Daniel, did you work with any of the Marlins pitchers prior to this stop?
No, it is crazy, especially as much as people change places. But no, I don't believe actually Jesus Tinoco is the only one, I think.
He was pretty darn good last year for us.
What a spark plug.
He was awesome. And we were fortunate enough to get him with the Cubs, kind of in that initial waiver claim. So I got to know him for 2 to 3 weeks. We kind of identified a few things for him to work on. And again, like it helps. But 2 to 3 weeks isn't a ton of time. Especially when you meet somebody during the course of the season. There's a little bit, more high stress, and he has to be ready to pitch that night. So a little bit different than meeting him in the off season, but he's been great. He's a great personality. He's always got a smile on his face. And he's quite a good pitcher as well. So it certainly helps.
Daniel, I also was curious to this because I think some pitching coaches get a reputation of working with the starters more than the bullpen because you have a bullpen coach. How do you kind of see that as your role as the pitching coach?
I guess the most important variable for me to lay out is that, like, as the head of a group, I guess you want to call it now, because everything in baseball now has become kind of a team of teams.
Sure.
Right? You don't just have one hitting coach anymore. You don't just have one pitching coach. And so you do have to be able to delegate responsibilities. I think one of the bigger things that I learned from Tommy Hotovy is just the power of delegation and the power of not having an ego. Like the answer doesn't have to come from me. The big fix for Sandy Alcantara doesn't need to come from me. If one of the assistants or bullpen coaches sees something and, brings it, I'm going to tell that guy to go have the conversation. Like, I want them to be empowered to coach. I want them to be, feel confident and comfortable going straight to a player. Now, obviously there's lines of communication that have to be checked, and you have to make sure that everybody's on the same page and everybody's up to speed and in the loop on things that are happening, because a lot is going on at the major league level on a daily basis. So communication is key, but I never want a guy on my staff to feel like he can't go talk to a player. That is just not a place that I can live in.
I apologize in advance, Daniel. I know we're going to bounce around a lot. You just talked about some of your relationship building and chatting with some of these guys that you'll have an opportunity to work with this season. You'll start with 13 pitchers. Even the best teams probably use 30, 35. This is wildly unfair for me to ask, but I'll do it anyway. If you want to get into individuals, feel free. Can you give me the 10,000-foot view as you started to look at this roster on the pitching side, what you see moving into 2025 and how excited you are to work with this team?
Oh, really excited. Ton of arm talent. It's not all that often that you can say we're in a rebuild. I think that's probably fair and accurate that we're in a little bit of a mini rebuild here, as we want to do some things differently. But you don't often have that much arm talent. And I think back to when I joined the Cubs in 2022, like they were still finishing up their rebuild at that point. And what we stepped into there like was not a great surplus of arm talent. It felt very much like a rebuild type of pitching staff and roster. And sure, there were a few nice pieces, especially the bullpen side. We had David Robertson, Michael Givens, and Chris Martin there that, it's nice to have those pieces to swallow at the back end. But if you're someone who has at least a little bit of common sense, you can easily see that those are likely guys that are going to be gone prior to July rolling around, because they're going to become trade acquisitions for teams that are buying and looking to build out their roster for the playoffs. And so, if you look at the second half of that season and look at the names that we ran through, I mean, we were just piecing it together. We were getting starts from Anderson Espinosa, and, Adrian Sampson was kind of our workhorse. It was just kind of this different dynamic and different world. And so you fast forward to where I'm at now with Miami, and you've got Sandy Alcantara sitting at the top of the rotation. You know that Yuri Perez is coming back at some point behind him. Until recently, we also had Jesus Luzardo, but like Edward Cabrera, I think there's a ton of untapped potential in there. And, I'm hopeful to be able to help him find his way to a little bit more consistency so that we can tap into the talent that everybody knows he has. And so, and then the bullpen's got a bunch of really nice pieces to it as well. And, don't crucify me for failing to mention anybody's name specifically, but
Of
like
course.
the overarching theme here is that like there is a ton of arm talent. We got some really unique guys that we're going to be able to deploy tactically. And I think I'm just really excited to, finally get to be in person with them and, in the grind with them.
All right. I'm going to take a step back now because you mentioned Bill Hiesel's name. Obviously, an interesting relationship here. Both of you kind of in search of the same opportunity, and you end up working underneath Bill, who's overseeing this, but as the major league pitching coach, which is amazing. I remember, and Steven, tell me if I'm totally crazy here, Bill was in college ball, maybe junior college, Division II, felt very unfulfilled, was trying to figure out, and he never had bad coaches, but like, why couldn't he get more out of himself? Daniel, you've had an amazing, again, trajectory where I don't know if people know your story. You were the 4th overall pick in the late 2000s, and that's an opportunity that you're a 1%er, even less than that. I'm probably speaking out of turn, but I assume you probably feel like you didn't have the major league career that you wanted. When you have dove into the service of helping others, do you feel like this is more fulfilling and like helping young men now reach their potential and maybe opportunities you didn't get, if that's fair of me to ask? Maybe a little personal. I apologize if it is.
Not personal at all. And if you check if you do a Google search about the MLB draft, come around draft time, you will see my name pop up on occasion. And I mean, it's now working on the business side of this. Like, I totally get it. Like, would I have taken myself if I was running the Pirates organization back then, knowing what I know now? Probably not. And so did I have the career that like I thought that I was capable of having? Probably not. I will be very open and transparent. Like, I was a talented individual, like in terms of like raw stuff. I could throw hard back when left-handed pitchers, frankly, just didn't throw that hard. And so, there were things to attach yourself to in terms of appeal. But I also think that like I got drafted as a starting pitcher, and I don't think there was a very high probability that I was going to make it in the major leagues as a starting pitcher. And so that's just kind of the inefficiencies of the process back then when, there wasn't as much information available on players. Now we have draft combines and tons of workouts, and everybody has TrackMan data available. And so we do a lot better of, job of, creating player profiles, and I think making the selection process a lot more efficient. But to the real like sticking point of the question you asked, it is 100% what drives my like coaching goals and desire and like what I want to stand for. And that's not letting players slip through the cracks. I did, in my opinion, have like a pretty solid foundation level of talent, but I didn't really get developed. We didn't know anything about spin data. We didn't know much about breaking pitches. We weren't using pitch tracking tech back then. And, the biggest shortcoming for me is I struggled with breaking ball consistency. And, I just really didn't know much about how to create a different shape. It was really like centered around like, well, you just need to throw it in this area. But as we've moved forward and we understand more about it, like I had a pretty gyro slider, like throwing it in the area where they were telling me to throw it wasn't necessarily the best path forward for that particular pitch, but you have to know the pitch types and the traits and the characteristics of it to help guide someone where they want to execute it. But essentially I felt like I slipped through the cracks. Like there were things that I could have been developed on, and that was what the eye-opening experience at Driveline is like I had never really had one breaking ball, and I went to Driveline, and through the pitch design process, I came out of there with 3 breaking balls. And to me, that shows you what the power of development can be. And like they weren't all just like fringe average pitches, like they profiled as like pretty dang good offerings. And that was in 3 to 4 short months, like really actually probably 2.5, 3 months, because the pitch design process was really like knocked out 2/3 of the way through the off season. And all it takes is data, tech, feedback, and an action plan moving forward. And you can really execute on a lot of things. And so that was so eye-opening to me, is like, wow, like what other players are out there missing this opportunity or this potential that they don't even know that they can tap into. And so that's certainly been a driving force behind, what I want to be known for as a coach.
Could have been you and I, Kyle. We should have went to Driveline.
You know what? I lost Daniel 3 minutes ago. That's all I could think about, Steve. That could have been me. I got a 78-mile-an-hour fastball. I could have worked on that.
Tape of it.
What is interesting, Kyle, is when Daniel talks, there's just an intelligence that is far beyond mine. But he also reminds me a ton of when we spoke with Ryan Weathers. When Ryan Weathers was with us and we interviewed him, we were blown away. I mean, we're asking him simple questions like we're doing with you right now, and him just going on this different language, basically. I'm very curious. Was that the 45-minute conversation with Ryan Weathers? And if you don't want to share, what was that conversation like? Obviously, his big man, played in the majors, and he thinks like a major league pitcher.
Yeah, Ryan, I think if I remember correctly, Ryan was definitely one of the longer conversations that we had. But you can just tell like just how much pure joy he gets out of like talking pitching and thinking about baseball. Like it is very, very easy to tell. And so that conversation was really, really fun because we got to, talk about a bunch of concepts. When we first connected, he was also in Greenville, South Carolina, which obviously is 45 minutes away from Clemson. So that was an easy connecting point. He also lives in the Southeast in Alabama. I'm down here in Charleston, South Carolina. So we're not terribly far away from each other, and, could talk about the Southeast and what life is like down here and how it's, a little bit different than the time he spent in San Diego on the West Coast and all that good stuff. So there was like a really easy, door open to connect with him. But you're right in that, like, he also has a very, very high, strong aptitude for just like the pitching space. When we did connect on more of the finer points of baseball and he laid out all the things that he's been focused on and working on, they all lined up with things that I would have had him working on and focusing on, anyways. And so for him to have the right mindset and to be able to process, okay, how do I make myself the best version of myself? Like, he's already doing it, which makes coaching him really, really easy because you don't have to create the buy-in. He's already created it for himself, and he's a worker and wants to work. And, he's had a tremendous offseason thus far and put himself in a really good place.
Steven, we said last week, if he didn't get hurt on that fluke injury, he was headed towards a trip to Arlington last summer. He was an all-star the way he was pitching. Now he's dropped the weight. He was over in Scotland getting in trouble in the streets, throwing. They didn't know what that guy was doing, throwing that ball. I saw that article. Thought it was very funny. Daniel, you brought up Clemson. If we could detour for a moment, are you thrilled that Dabo's finally dipping his toes into the transfer portal? He was very stubborn on that, Daniel.
Count me amongst those who didn't expect to be talking transfer portal on this phone call.
Well, you come to the right spot.
I love that segue. Honestly, so 2 big things. One, I think with the news this morning, we've also finally undone 2 of probably I think if he evaluates it the way that I do, he'll probably call them 2 of his worst coaching decisions that he's made since he's run the program. And that was the coordinator hires from within. He promoted Brandon Streeter and he promoted Wes Goodwin, both of which, they aren't success stories at this point. Wes Goodwin had at least some success. Brandon Streeter was not very successful in his run as offensive coordinator. But bringing in Garrett Riley to replace Streeter a couple years ago, now making the move to bring in Allen to replace Wes Goodwin. Like, I love those moves. I think it brings back the identity that he wants to have and his program to be known for. And then obviously dipping toes into the transfer portal. I knew that one was just a matter of time. He had to figure out how to work work through his process. And one thing that I'll say about Dabo Swinney is I think his view of how player compensation works is probably how every head coach in college football wishes that player compensation worked. And that's that you paid players based on their merit and the stats that they put up for your team, not paying them ahead of time before they've even played a down of football before your team. And that's the problem, is like he's trying to avoid the bidding war type of place. But he also knows that like he's paying his players X. If he goes and offers someone in the transfer portal Y that's greater than X, he's got some dilemma, and like that's a hit to his culture. And as you know, Dabo Swinney, like everything to him matters or centers around culture. And so he's tried to keep this synergy, and like I will give him credit, like he's done a tremendous job of that. And I think that the other area that you have to at least consider is that the transfer portal is multifaceted. It's not just about entrances, it's about exits as well. And I do think that he's done a better job than really any other program in the country on the retention side of things. And that does matter. Like you don't have to replace as much when you don't lose as much. All of that being said,
you're really good at this, Daniel. You're really good at this.
All that being said, I love that he is now dipping his toes in the transfer portal. We went and got a starting defensive end. We went and got wide receiver depth. And now we just got a high upside linebacker. And so I don't think those will be the last additions. I think you'll see more in the spring, but I'm definitely excited about it.
So that was Reese Davis on Clemson.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I said that was Reese Davis on Clemson. Go ahead, Kyle.
I just said I think I picked up. I think you like Clemson football. Is that fair to say, Daniel?
Despite working in baseball, football is still a passion of mine. Clemson football specifically, but really just football in general. I love the game of football.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Okay, I'm glad I asked about the I knew we were headed in the right direction. Let's get back to pitching. Again, this one feels a little unfair because I think people would have different answers. There's a human element to this game, but obviously technology is so important. You obviously now understand that firsthand from your experience at Driveline, which has unlocked the potential of so many current major league pitchers. Where are we with pitching in today's game, Daniel, knowing that there's a human side to this? And Sandy will go have games where he just doesn't feel right throwing his slider, but it's part of the game plan and we have to adjust. But the data says to throw it. Like, where are we at in pitching in today's game?
Well, I think to the example that you laid out specifically, yeah, you go into each game with a game plan. But that's a hypothetical, right? Like you're going to use data, you're going to use predictive measures and outcomes to guide a lot of that, but that's just part of the process. Once you get out there and once, the first inning is underway, you don't really know what he's going to have on that given day. Like maybe the changeup's not there, maybe the slider is, maybe the slider's not there, or vice versa. And so I think it's, you go in with the plan, but then you have to adjust accordingly. For someone like Sandy, the game's probably relatively easy when all things are clicking. He's got elite stuff. He's got pretty close to elite command. He's a bulldog. He's got a really good frame. He puts himself in good shape. He checks a lot of the boxes, but at the end of the day, like if there's a game where he doesn't have his slider, we're not going to just, bang our head against the wall and keep throwing it if it's not there. We're probably going to deviate to something else. He's got other weapons, all the while knowing that at some point we're probably going to continue to mix in sliders to see if he ends up finding it. Because a lot of times guys are different in inning 3 and inning 5 than they were in inning 1. And so it's not, you don't write it off for the entire day. You just don't put yourself into bad situations and bad scenarios by sticking to something that's clearly not working. Now sample size plays into that. You don't make a judgment off the first slider he throws. You're probably waiting to see a bucket of, 5 to 7 sliders before you decide if he has his good slider that day. But you also do need to be somewhat quick to adjust so that, he doesn't exit the game in the third inning because we've had a bad game plan, or we stuck to a game plan that wasn't executable with what he was presenting with that day.
I know by definition, a quality start is 6 innings, less than 3 runs, but kind of like what Kyle was asking with this day and age of pitching, what's a quality start for you?
It's a loaded question, right? As we've gone through data and analytics, and there are numbers that show us that pitchers don't need to turn the lineup over a third time, that, that is where like sometimes things come off the rails a little bit. That's a really, really good question. I do think that if you give me 5 scoreless, that should be considered a quality start. I think if you give me 5 with 1 run or 2 runs, it's probably a quality start. And that, like, I can hand that off to 3 or 4 bullpen guys to close off the deal, and we're likely in a game scenario or a game state where we have a chance to win that game. And so rather than it being attached to, specific numbers, to me, it's about like game flow. And some of the game theory is like, if you hand it off to the bullpen with a lead, like, you've probably done your job. Nobody wants to give up 4 runs in 5 innings or 4 runs in 6 innings just because your offense had a good day. Like, they're probably not coming away feeling great from that, but they also did the task at hand, which was give us a chance to win the game. Sometimes, you give up a couple runs here or there, and like, we have to be okay with that because you might not the next time out. And so, if the offense spots us 10 runs and you end up giving up 4 through 6 innings, like, to me, that's still a quality start because we're going to win that game. And it's a lot
contextual.
I think that there has to be a context applied to it, especially as like we've gone with openers. Like, does a starter that follows the opener still get a quality start if he throws 6 scoreless after the opener? I mean, technically not, because he's not pitching as a starter, but
right,
to me, that's probably a quality start as well. So, there's some intricacies that have changed the way that we evaluate like what a quality start is. But at the end of the day, like, keep the game within reason, give us a chance to win. And I think that's probably going to be a good place to go.
How much has your job changed or not changed with PitchCom only checking over possibly 2 times? Better to get him the 3rd time before he takes off. How much has that changed the landscape from a technology and a rule standpoint in pitching?
Well, the rule standpoint to me is a good one. I think PitchCom's great. I think, I no longer have to print sign cards off for pitchers to have in their hats. We don't have to worry about signs being stolen from second base, etc. But that's brought new, developments that are things that we now have to account for, like a much larger dedication to pitch tipping. And so we have to make sure guys are buttoned up. And so you're starting to see teams put some things in place to, like, systemize how guys come set. Where's their glove position? How can we, take a lot of the legwork out, off of the player and make it about like our processes and how we do things. So that's definitely one area. I had another one off the top of my head. The controlling the running game. I think you're starting to see, catcher arm strength and pop time and transition time become more of a thing. I think you're starting to see, can guys be quicker to home plate? Can they hold the ball when they need to? And can they combat that front? Because I came from a division in the NL Central, where, you're facing the Reds, you're facing the Brewers. They run a whole lot. The Pirates have some team speed. They have guys that can take advantage of it. The Cardinals, maybe not as, much of a threat as those guys, but they also have really smart veterans who, if you fall asleep on, can swipe bags from under your nose. And so I think you've seen a, concerted effort to controlling the running game and combating pitch tipping, which has changed from some of the other dynamic back before we had PitchCom and there weren't rules on like how many times you could pick over, et cetera.
Kyle, I got some outside baseball questions, unless you want to wrap it up with baseball.
No, not really. I thought the running game was very interesting. I feel like there are certain teams we see throughout the year where it seems very important to that particular pitching staff that, hey, we're not giving you just the free 90 here. Like, that's important because a base hit's going to score that guy. Is there more of an emphasis more than ever now on controlling the running game, do you think? Or is that just kind of where we're at in today's game?
I think that, the genesis of the rule changes that they wanted more action and wanted more excitement, right? Like minimizing the shifting of infielders. You want more balls in play to turn into hits. You want more action on the base paths because stolen bases had really, like those stolen base attempts had really plummeted for a number of years in number of consecutive years. And so I just think that they wanted the game to have more action in it and for it to be more exciting. And I think that stolen base attempts are part of that. I think that more runners on base because more ground balls get through that 4-hole, I think is a good thing for baseball. Now, it's my job as a pitching coach to try to combat that. Okay, what are we going to do to prevent the number of tips, which means you have to dial in your looks, you have to dial in your holds. Maybe you improve pickoff moves a little bit, but really it's about reducing the number of attempts, not necessarily trying to create as many outs as possible on the base paths. But yeah, it's a game of adjustments, right? You get presented with rule changes, and then you put something in place to combat some of the way that the game changes because of those rule changes. And so, it is like a little bit of a back and forth, but at the end of the day, like, we have all of this data at our disposal. It's going to tell us and paint the story, or paint the picture, tell the story for us. It's our job to be able to make the interventions and adjustments that we need to stay at the forefront of what's happening.
And just one note from me, Steve, and then take it away. Well, last year was very much interesting in that regard for the Marlins. They caught more men stealing than anybody in baseball with 45, but also allowed 139 stolen bases, was like 6th or 7th most in the league. So you could catch them, but they were also running. So very interesting. But Steven, wrap us up, my man.
Yeah. Day in the life in the off season for you. How does it look?
Clemson transfer portal.
I'm up at 6 a.m. to get my daughter ready for school. I drop her off at the bus stop. That's usually around like 7:15. I'll get back home. If time allows for it, I'll try to get a workout in some capacity. I've got a decent little like home gym that I can, usually get something in 45 minutes or so. So I like to start my day there. Then it's a cup of coffee and right in front of the computer. We've got a lot of work to do, and, spring training's right around the corner. And so, we've got all the player check-ins and player plan stuff, but we also have a lot of like logistical things going on to get ready for that report date. And so it's really just about making sure I bucket the time that I need to get the task that I have for that day done. I'll usually be done in front of the computer by about like 3:30 or 4, and then I'll try and knock out a few phone calls to players or text messages to players at that point. But that's an ideal. A lot of times text messages or phone calls will come in throughout the day, and you just get to them as you need to.
Do you try to eat 3 meals a day? You didn't mention your breakfast.
Eating is not something that I do a ton of. So I am someone who engages in intermittent fasting. So breakfast is usually cut out. My first meal usually doesn't happen till like 2 to 3 p.m. And so like I'll eat a meal, then I'll probably have like another, like, I guess if it works out this way, I'll have another meal at like 7:30, and then maybe a snack at like 9:30. And that's kind of my eating window.
Wow. I've heard a lot of people doing that. Obviously it looks good on you.
Well, one thing that I learned in 2022 is that the food at the major league level is not quite as healthy as it is at the minor league level. And there's a lot more of it. And self-discipline has not like always been my greatest asset with food. Obviously I have discipline because I can fast, but discipline when something is put in front of me that looks delicious.
Mac and cheese.
I'm
going to game spread,
and I'm going to try it. And so I have found that the fasting lifestyle has kept the bad body weight off for the most part.
We can relate.
I hear you. Well, Daniel, thank you for the time. We are so pumped to really get a chance to meet you in Jupiter in spring training, get to know you, watch you and this entire staff go to work. Stephen and I have talked about it ad nauseum, but like, the attention to detail and the care that you guys all seem to have for like the guys is amazing to me. We wish you nothing but the luck, but good luck on the pitching side. But, most importantly, the Dabo situation, he's got his DN. Klubnik's back for you. I mean, this is shaping up to be a great 2025. So thanks again, Daniel.
You got it. This was an absolute blast. Thanks for making it really, really fun.